This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit TemptationsTreats.com to learn more.
Imagine this. The best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my fellow Democrat, University of Northern Iowa political scientist Justin Holmes, as well as Cincinnati attorney Joey Ashbrook. Justin and Joey, I'm looking forward to continuing where we left off with the weekend show. And that, I believe, means that we will start with the Supreme Court, actually, because in this last week, there was a 6-3 decision along ideological lines, with the court upholding Tennessee's ban on puberty blockers and hormone therapy for transgender teens. Now, this law was challenged by 3 transgender minors, their parents, and a doctor, who argued that it violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The district court agreed, concluding that transgender people are a quasi-suspect class and that the law was unlikely to survive the standard of intermediate scrutiny, which is called for in such cases. The Sixth Circuit, though, right here in Cincinnati, disagreed. They concluded that heightened scrutiny was not called for and that the law satisfies the standard rational basis review. The Supreme Court's 6 conservatives agreed with the Sixth Circuit, with Chief Justice Roberts, who is writing for majority, arguing that while the law's prohibitions reference sex, the court has never suggested that mere reference to sex is sufficient to trigger heightened scrutiny. And such an approach would be especially inappropriate in the medical context, where some treatments and procedures are uniquely bound up in sex. Justice Sotomayor, author of the dissent, was joined by Justice Jackson and in part by Justice Kagan, wrote, "The majority subjects a law that plainly discriminates on the basis of sex to mere rational basis review. By retreating from meaningful judicial review exactly where it matters most, the court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. In sadness, I dissent." So, Joey, you're our resident attorney. I thought we'd start with you. What did you think about this decision?
I think it's correct. I think that it's correct as a matter of law, and that it's not surprising as a matter of policy, though understanding, I'm sure a lot of the listeners out there have strong opinions about this issue, potentially even opposite mine. I think it's correct as a matter of law because it's a correct view of classification of people, and there's not a suspect class that has been drawn related to transgender status similar to race, related to immutable characteristics. So I think as a matter of law, that's correct. I think as a matter of policy, European countries who tend to be more left of us on social issues, a lot of them are allowing regulation by the government related to sex change surgeries, treatments for minors. So that in the American federalist system, where states have the police power, including regulating medicine for their jurisdictions as a policy matter, allowing states to make those decisions also seems not only correct, it also seems in our current global order at the moment, not surprising. So I think it was right both on the law and policy.
How about you, Justin?
I think it's wrong on both. There you go. On the law, I think it's a closer thing, and I have to preface this with I'm not a lawyer, so but it does seem to me that there is a gender component to this. I mean, I think the dissent is correct in terms of this is tied up with gender. In particular, these are essentially treatments, hormone therapy, puberty blockers. Those existed prior to any discussion of transgender people. And essentially they're available to some and not to others. Essentially, you can get puberty blockers for certain conditions. You can get hormone therapy for certain conditions. But essentially where they're drawing the line here is around gender. That, some people can get them, but you can't get those hormones if you're a boy. And again, whether that rises to kind of the standard legal standard for that, I'm have to defer, I suppose. On the other hand, 3 justices agreed with me. I will say, as a matter of policy, I do agree that states have the ability to regulate medical procedures and such. I don't think this is a great regulation. These are relatively low stakes interventions. They're reversible. We're not talking about sex change surgery, which nobody does on minors. And so, I don't think it's a great policy. It seems to be, helpful to some subset of people with gender dysphoria. And it really is taking an option off the table for, I don't think, any particularly useful purposes.
Meta AI is the personal AI to help you with whatever you need. Plus, it meets you where you are. Not only is Meta AI now an app, but it's also on the apps you already know and love: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Plus the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. It's easy to access wherever you are. So whether you're talking or texting, Meta AI is convenient to use throughout your day. Experience our newest AI that's tailored to you by downloading the Meta AI app. Try the Meta AI app today on the Apple App Store and Google Play.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
I guess to me, I feel like there are two things that I focused on. One is, what is the appropriate standard of review? And until you can answer that question, you can't really go further. And it seems to me that if you accept the majority's viewpoint, as I understand it, that this, in fact, should not be done under anything other than rational basis view, which is kind of the lowest standard. What that means is that Tennessee just needs to have some sort of, non-ridiculous argument for doing what it's doing. And I looked at the law. They cite their interest as a couple of things: encouraging minors to appreciate their sex, particularly as they undergo puberty. That maybe put an image in my head that was different from what the legislatures wanted exactly, but appreciating your sex as you go through puberty. Yeah. Anyway, but as well as, you got it, prohibiting medical procedures that are harmful, unethical, immoral, experimental or unsupported by high quality or long-term studies, or that might encourage minors to become disdainful of their sex. Now, I think there's some stuff in there that seems to me to be not, on the face of it, nuts. Those medical reasons, Joe, you mentioned other countries, and certainly there have been systemic reviews by, was it Sweden, the UK, and Finland, where they found that, the risks of these procedures can outweigh, and often do outweigh, the benefits. So, and so I guess if you accept that gender identity is not at least a quasi-suspect class, then that makes sense to me. I'm not convinced that that's the right standard of analysis, but I think you could argue that even if you say heightened scrutiny, I can say this, heightened scrutiny is appropriate here, then the question becomes, is the law related to an important governmental interest? And does it further that interest by means that are substantially related to that interest? I think you could even make the case that the law could still survive that level of scrutiny. When you say, well, is protecting minors from irreversible medical procedures an important governmental interest? Yeah, I think you can say, yeah, is banning these procedures for minors related to that? Well, I think you can argue, yeah, absolutely so. And in that way, I guess I feel like I'm sort of in line, weirdly, in part, with Justice Alito, who said, well, yeah, the law essentially does discriminate based on gender identity, but that's okay because that's different from discriminating based on sex, which I think was sort of what Chief Justice Roberts was getting at as well there a little bit. Joy, do you want to speak to that level of a review thing? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll say that I think that especially at the Supreme Court, from folks who I disagreed with, I think the case was argued about as intelligently as it could have been argued. And I do. And in the legal constitutional order, you're right, Mike, to intuit that really the ballgame is what standard of review gets applied. So if you get strict scrutiny applied to something, it's not absolutely impossible that the law will be upheld, but empirically, I don't have any of this data, but I'm very confident anecdotally to say it is almost assuredly going down. So as a practical matter, lawyers know whichever box of review gets slapped on the question at hand is not completely, but almost completely going to be determinative of where the result ends up being, just in the history of our jurisprudence. So that you're focusing on the right pieces. And I think that there's a lot of things going on and a lot of different arguments. You can have a compelling interest. All this that you're right, everything that you mentioned allows for a compelling interest, but there's a dynamic related to whether or not gender status or transgender status or sexual status itself is a status, and that like race. And I personally don't think so, because I think there's a matter of legal categories. Immutable characteristics is a matter of logic and application are really important for questions of when the government makes distinctions based on immutable characteristics. And when it's not an immutable characteristics, it's a matter of rule of law values for everyone for justice to apply equally. It's not administrable as a rule of law value. So recognizing that this is for a lot of our listeners out there, I'm sure an issue that they have deep passion about. I concede that. I understand that. Is a matter of law. I think that gender status not being a suspect class, it's correct in terms of our constitutional tradition, but I think it's also the right rule of law rule because it's not an immutable characteristic.
What do you think, Justin?
Well, I guess I kind of disagree with the idea that it's not in terms of it being immutable. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, yeah, it's very much about transition, which, clearly that would seem to throw, immutable into the wind a little bit. But on the other hand, I mean, this is a real thing. And I think that's some of the dispute is that, in some corners, there's this idea that, oh, this is, some, made up thing. But, there are people who are transgender that they have this as a status. And it's a very real thing, from kind of the people I know, who are transgender and I know a few parents with transgender children. I think immutable, we're sort of conflating a couple things, maybe. I mean, on the one hand, the idea of gender transition feels like, well, gosh, that throws everything into question about what's immutable and what's not. On the other hand, I mean, this is a real thing that doesn't go away. And I think it's also sort of a class that is singled out to be treated differently. And, kind of throwing all of those together, yeah, we don't have a history of recognizing that as a thing, but that's maybe, to my mind, not the same thing as saying it's not something worth recognizing. And yeah.
I guess I feel like it's clear to me that Tennessee has at least a site, and I'll take them at their word, the legislature, they cite those two basic types of interests or motives, right? The medical thing, where I think they're on stronger, firmer ground. And then, even though reasonable people can disagree, as well as the whole appreciate your sex, don't be disdainful of your sex, which I have big problems with that, certainly. And I would think libertarians would have big problems with the state saying, hey, you should appreciate your sex. And hey, go to hell. I'll disdain my sex if I want to. I'm an American, damn it. But if this concern, if it's really a medical thing, I find myself wondering, well, okay, then if the state has legitimate concern with preventing medical procedures, as they say, are harmful, unethical, unsupported by high quality studies, that sort of thing, well, then shouldn't they ban elective cosmetic surgery for minors, given that they can be in many ways more irreversible and carry a higher risk of complications, a higher mortality rate? And I did some digging. As best I can tell, Tennessee law doesn't bar any other medical intervention for minors or for adults that's been approved by recognized medical bodies. And when we look at gender transitioning efforts or any kind of, like, we're talking about hormone blockers here in this law, puberty blockers and hormone therapy, this has been approved by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AMA, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the Endocrine Society. They all support gender-affirming care for minors when conducted according to appropriate established clinical guidelines. And so I think you can make a reasonable argument that the medical thing is sort of like a covering. What this really is selective targeting. And if you can demonstrate that, which is difficult to do, but if you can, that's the sort of thing that could possibly not even survive rational basis analysis, at least in my understanding. We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,